Hey everyone, hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Shelly, and today I'm going to be talking you through my rankings of the Booktube Prize. I just realized right now that I did not grab any of my books, so I will have to do that. But anyhow, if you don't know what the Booktube Prize is, then I will explain that, and then I will be ranking my books from worst to first, and then I will hopefully have a reaction to how my rankings paired up with the actual results of the prize. So if you're new to my channel, then hi, welcome. I'm Shelly. I love books and reading, and recently I was chosen to be a judge for the Booktube Prize. I read and I'm going to rank 6 nonfiction books. If this is your kind of jam, reading all kinds of books, but particularly nonfiction, if you clicked on this video, then I would encourage you to subscribe, stick around, and without any further rambling on, let's go ahead and get into the meat of this video. In case you don't know what the Booktube Prize is, the Booktube Prize is a literary prize ran here on Booktube and other social media platforms. And what happens is that we start off with a large section of books and of fiction and nonfiction, and each of those larger sections are broken down into subsections. And it is what is it? It's like a ranking, not a ranking style. It's a bracket system, essentially. It's like a bracket system. So each individual group has 6 books, and the top 3 books of each section move on to the next round. There are 4 of these rounds, and I was privy to judge the 3rd round. Sometimes I wonder if I even make sense when I'm explaining this prize. I guess what you all need to know is that I was assigned 6 nonfiction books to read and rank, and 3 of the books will move on to the final round. And I forget, I will maybe flash it across the screen what section I had, but more importantly is that I knew what books I needed to read and I read them. So we're gonna start at the very bottom. Maybe I should talk about how I am judging these books. Oh, my earring just fell out. I'm just getting all excited. How I decided to judge these books. I decided to judge these books based off of the writing, whether the way that the information was presented continued to capture my imagination and my attention. And basically I was thinking about how well this is executed, right? So I feel bad. Okay, so, and also none of these books were poorly written in any way, shape, or form. All of the books had something to say for itself in that I thought all of the topics were really interesting and really important, so I was lucky in that manner. And mostly I'm just putting off my number 6 book. So my number 6 book, unfortunately, was Half American by Matthew F. Delmont. I have realized something about myself, and tell me if you were like this as well, but I love to learn. I love to learn new things. I like when someone is shedding information on a topic that I didn't know about. And so here with Half American, that was kind of the issue. So this is about Black Americans serving in World War II and their treatment and the way that laws were in place that really discriminated against Black Americans. An incredibly important topic. However, I've read quite a bit on race in America, and I've read a lot about World War II. And when you put those topics together in a book such as this, then there wasn't anything new. Unfortunately, sadly, the way that Black Americans were treated and discriminated against, some of it was new to me, but it wasn't surprising in any way, which is terrible to say. But the realities of that was true. So in a lot of ways, I felt like I was reading a narrative that I've already read before. And unfortunately for Matthew F. Delmont, he wasn't presenting, I didn't get a sense of his personality. I was like, his writing was very like formulaic. He had his topic, his chapter, which sometimes focused on a particular place or a particular person and how that person was mistreated. And then he would sort of conclude it all up. And so after a while, I got to understand the way that he formatted the book, and I could feel the cadence of his writing, which sometimes annoys me. And then when I was reading it, it was like, I could just see where each chapter was going and the point that he was going to make. And again, unfortunately, it wasn't surprising. So, a couple of the things were, there was some atrocious things that happened in a training camp that was based in the South, and Southerners were extremely discriminatory and even violent towards the military, or the military personnel, the Black military personnel that were working in those training camps, or were training in those training camps. And it was just, it's atrocious. It's atrocious. But the thing was that I was sort of bored by it. I just felt like there was, again, it was nothing new to me. Now, it could also be that I'm just a little bit burned out of books about World War II. And so reading this account in this way, that was sort of an overview of the Black experience during World War II, it wasn't super interesting to me. And so in a lot of ways, it lost my attention. About halfway through, it was just starting to feel like a slog, because I didn't feel, and I wasn't really learning anything new. I sort of got the point of his book, and ultimately I just thought it could have been a really well-written essay in the Atlantic, and that would have done just as well as this entire book. So yeah, I felt like it was the expanded form of an essay that perhaps the author wrote for a well-established and well-regarded magazine, but instead we were getting like the expanded form in a book. It just didn't work for me. It just didn't. It was like a slog to finish. I'm so sorry. I feel terrible. Okay. So this was number 6, and I struggled putting it into the number 6 spot, but ultimately, like, I couldn't get over the fact that I didn't want to return to it, and when I did, it just felt like a school assignment. So I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about this, but yeah, that's that. Half American, number 6. Number 5 was Paradise Falls, and this was by Keith O'Brien, I think. This was the first book that I read for the Booktube Prize, and overall, it was about a town, and particularly a school that was built on top of a chemical dumping plant. And because it was a chemical dumping plant, there were still chemicals leaking through the ground and causing health issues for people living in that neighborhood and children going to that school. And of course, it's like corporate greed, corporate cover-up. So in order to figure out what was going on to these children primarily, and to others, but particularly to a few of the children in the neighborhood, mothers had to bond together in order to figure out what was happening, and to take action. And there was, the beginning was very slow. It was building, the history of this piece of land and who owned it and what happened to it. The middle was really interesting, when I think there was the most energy around when the women were the mothers basically of the neighborhood were bonding together, were trying to figure out what was happening to their children, were trying to take action. And the way that they formed bonds and the way that they created change was really super interesting. So instead of the sloggy middle, it was like the opposite. It was like the exciting and juicy and meaty meat of the middle. It was so good. And then at the end, it's like the women, in real life, the women do start taking their separate paths, which is totally normal. They bonded together for this very particular issue, and then they move forward. And that was just okay to me. I feel like the author kind of loses the plot and doesn't really know how to tie up all of the loose ends. And that's how it felt as a reader. I was like, okay, so we're following this person, then we're following this person. And it kind of loses its own self near the end of the book. It's not a novel, near the end of the nonfiction book. But ultimately, it was a really interesting story. But because of the ends, the sort of slow beginning and slow end to it all, that's why it ranks at number 5. Number 4 is The Song of the Cell by Siddhartha Mukherjee. So what's really interesting is that I think this is one of the most elegant books of the bunch. Well written, well researched, thoroughly considered. And this is where I really had to come up with these parameters of, did it keep my attention? Did it keep my imagination? Did I want to return to it? And ultimately, I could tell that this book is really, 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 really good. But the reason that it ranks at number 4 is that now that I've gotten a little bit of distance from this, the sciencey parts, because this is all about cellular biology and the history of cellular biology, and Siddhartha Mukherjee, the author, is a hematologist. He studies blood and he looks at things at that level, and he does such a great job constructing like what a cell is and the way that cells have developed through history. It's really good, but it was a little too science heavy for me. And those parts were kind of a wash. I was just like, I don't really get it. And I think part of it is just a me thing. This is not really my bread and butter, cellular biology. And so it was like I lost the forest for the trees, because the things that really stood out for me were his personal stories. The stories in which he was talking about how the advancements in cellular biology and understanding how to treat cancer, and how what they're doing with this new kind of medicine and this understanding of the cell and how to manipulate it. When he talked about it and related it to a person, when he related it to himself, when he talked about the chapter on depression and the advancements that they're making in understanding how depression works and what part of the brains to target, that was ridiculously interesting. It was when we got into the actual like science part of it that I started to lose the plot. I just did. I was like, I am starting to like get lost in the details of the science of it all. And I think that this happened for me also with last year's biology book, which was Isaac Walterson's The Codebreaker. It was like a really interesting book, but of course the thing that I'm most interested in are the people, like are the narratives and who was involved. And when he would get into the actual science of it all, it was, I guess in a for lack of a better term, it was a little bit lost on me. So that could be a me thing, but ultimately when I got to those parts, it was just like, felt like a little bit of a slog. They didn't really stick with me, and I tried my darndest to really pay attention and to really learn from this author. And ultimately, I just think back, when I think back on this book, I think about the narratives that he told rather than the information about cells and the way cells work. I mean, I remember some of it, but like that's not really what stuck out to me. What stuck out to me was the stories that he told about people. So that's why this is at number 4, although I could tell like it's such an elegantly written book. It is really good. But yeah, just I think a bit heavy on the science for me. Number 3 was The Facemaker by Lindsay Fitzharris. Now Lindsay Fitzharris does something like that I think is incredible. She chooses one subject, one very narrow topic, and she looks at it from all different angles. Sounds like ankles, but angles. And so what she chose was plastic surgery, the advancements of plastic surgery, like facial reconstructive surgery during World War I. And she gets into why there was advancements in plastic surgery at this time. There was a lot of change in artillery, and that there was a lot more damages done to faces. There was doctors that were really interested in helping out in this way, but not just doctors, but dentists and artists and all different kinds of people who rallied together to help reconstruct the lives and the faces, and more broadly the lives of these young men who had lost something in World War I. And the way that she went about it was really interesting. Her writing is really engaging, and I tremendously enjoyed this book. You know, she talked about blood transfusions and the ways that they learned from the mistakes and the process of reconstructing someone's jaw or someone's nose. It was really, really interesting. And unlike The Song of the Cell, Lindsay Fitzharris didn't lose me in the medicine lingo. If I ever did get kind of in the weeds, so to speak, I would just, look up certain pictures and be like, oh, okay, this is what she's explaining. So it was really good. However, there was something that stuck out to me as a bit of a flaw, which is why it's at number 3 and not, any higher. It was that she uses language such as, this man's face was perfect. This man's face was flawless, or looked like, a Greek statue. So, in this, there's like this perfection to the face. And when I got to the end of the book, so at the end of the book, I read it on Kindle. When you get to the very, very end, there are pictures of the soldiers whose faces were reconstructed during this time. And before I looked at those pictures, and when I got to the final page of her writing, I had built up this picture in my mind of what these men would look like. And she even said she struggled with adding photos in of these soldiers for various reasons. She wasn't sure if she should include them, and then she decides to include them. And I was like, okay, I'm going to wait till the very end to look at these photos, and then I can see. So according to her writing, I started to build up this idea in my mind that the men would look as if they had never lived through trauma to their face, that they would have never lived through their faces at the end of all of these surgeries looked as if they were that of a Greek statue, like a perfected Greek statue, that they didn't look like they had lived through a war, or had trauma done to, or anything, like there was no damage done to their face. That's what Lindsay Fitzharris had led me to believe. And ultimately, when I looked at the pictures, you could tell that these men had lived through some sort of trauma, and that they sacrificed parts of their face. And I didn't like that she had led me to believe something else. I think that these men are they're American heroes. They're not American heroes. They're heroes for having fought in this war. They had sacrificed so much. And, who's to say, beauty isn't the eye of the beholder, 100%. However, I just had a very different picture than what she was saying, that these men's faces were a bit asymmetrical, that they looked very, very, very different than when they had first healed from the initial wounds. Like, there was a huge difference between their face after the initial healing and then after the multiple surgeries in order to reconstruct their face. But I felt like she could have worded it. She could have been a bit more plain spoken about, the way these men's faces looked, especially if she considered not including the pictures. So I don't know. I don't want to say it was like dishonest, but I don't think it was the most. Her writing wasn't dishonest. It was just, I just don't think it painted the most accurate picture of the way these men's faces ended up. And it really was incumbent upon the pictures to give me an accurate rendering of these men's faces. And so I thought of that as a bit of a flaw. And so, and so take that with what you will, but it really did end up bothering me. And as I'm articulating it, I'm like, oh, I hope no one comes for me. And, these are just my opinions. I tend to not worry about that because I know you all get me. But, I just didn't like that. I didn't like that. And I thought, again, she could have been a bit more accurate and a bit more honest when describing these men. And that there is no shame in, the way these men look in any way, shape, or form. And I just felt like this dishonest rendering made me wonder, like, why did she do that? So yeah, anyhow, we're going to move on. Ultimately, I really love the book. I thought it was really interesting. The inclusion of pictures was fascinating, and showed me even more than what she had depicted in her own writing. And it was just great. It really did capture like my attention, my imagination. I was fascinated by the whole process, and also that's why it ends up in the number 3 spot, because I thought it was just an incredibly readable and well done book. All right, the number 2 book is Sally Hayden's My Fourth Time We Drowned. Sally Hayden is a reporter who talks about, in the book she talks about how she ends up getting connected with Eritrean refugees and their time in Libya. And she does such a good job bringing to at least my consciousness this refugee crisis that's going on in Libya because of laws and policies put in place that there's this holdup from the EU, and refugees are getting held up in Libya, and the camps in Libya holding these refugees are incredibly inhumane. She draws this comparison of these Libyan holding camps, holding cells that are actually very similar to the World War II concentration camps that the Jews lived in and died in. And so that was, it's really a learning curve for me to have learned that this was going on in the world. Of course, it's like I have some vague knowledge of it, but then she really sharpens the focus of this issue in my mind and why people want to leave West Africa. Particularly, she focuses on the region Eritrea. And it was really a learning experience for me. These citizens are leaving West Africa and crossing the Mediterranean Sea and getting stuck and held up in Libya, and why that's happening. And it's fascinating and sad and heartbreaking, and very much akin to what is happening at the Mexican-American border, the border between Mexico and America. There is a very similar situation happening in that there are camps forming on the border of Mexico, and people want to get into the United States, but they can't because of certain U.S. policy, and they can't go back to their home, and so they're sort of stuck in this camp along the border, and terrible inhumane things are happening. And so a very similar situation is happening in Libya. And, she's in contact with these refugees, and she's through WhatsApp, and they find her on Facebook. They send her Facebook messages. They're keeping cell phones hidden so that they can send messages out to Sally. So she's like very much in it. And so she did such a good job balancing a global view of what's happening and why it's happening. These refugees fleeing their home country and trying to seek refuge in the EU, and what's happening in Libya, and why it's happening. And I thought that was such a feat. And she also does a really good job focusing in on the individual people, so that it's not just an overview of what's happening, but she's, following the narratives of certain people and giving you their story and their experiences. So you got a very narrow look and a very broad look at this issue, and it was really good. I learned a lot from it, and it was, again, something that kept me engaged, and I was curious as to what was going to happen next, and I was curious as to where she was going to take us. And it just, it's terrible what's happening, and just sharpening this whole issue to the forefront. I really struggled to put this at either the number 2 spot or the number 1 spot. I thought it was such a good book, and in a lot of ways, because of the nature of this writing, it's a political piece, it's current events, and so it's bringing an issue to our consciousness, right? But it's not the full story, and it's not because of that. I don't know. I just found a book that worked better. I thought it was such an important book, though, and so interesting and so well done. And if you are at all have any mild curiosity as to what is happening globally to people, I mean, who are living very different lives from us, and the way social media is getting involved, the way social media is changing this landscape in many different ways. And someone who writes it brilliantly and is just really thoughtful, and also like, you know, not afraid to tell you heart-wrenching stories about what's happening with this refugee, you know, people seeking refuge, and why it's happening. I mean, the whole thing, she just does such a good job. But I did find a book that I like better. Just, it's hard to talk about like a heartbreaking and heart-wrenching book and then be like, and this is part of my Booktube Prize reading. So, yeah, I would imagine, I'll end it with this. I'll imagine that this book sticks with me for a very, very long time, just because of how she was able to convey this issue and the importance and the way that it's affecting us globally. The final book, which I thought was just fantastic. I really liked it. And I think this is like most aligned to the kind of writing I enjoy, the kind of topics I enjoy, the things that I'm interested in, and it was Dan Saladino's Eating to Extinction. So this is my #1 book, and it's the world's rarest foods and why we need to save them. So this was done in some ways kind of formulaically, but it didn't bother me at all. So Dan Saladino talks about, or chooses, a particular food item or drink item. So there's honey and bear root and wheat, barley, the red pea, the lentil, the soybean, chicken. I mean, he has all these things, different salmon, apples, oranges, all different kinds of things. So in each, it's all broken down into a section based on the food group. So fruits, vegetables, grain, you know, meat, all these. So each section has little essays essentially. And what he does with every single food item that he focuses on is that he talks about the origin of the food in humanity, like when we started eating it and when it gained popularity. So, you know, he's talking about hundreds and hundreds of years ago, when this food hit humanity, it became a thing that we eat or consume. And then he goes through and he talks about the seismic shifts in that food's life. So, for example, the chicken was at one point used for mostly eggs, and it was a very revered animal, and it was only eaten for meat when it had stopped producing eggs. And then there was a seismic shift that happened in the chicken's life, in the history of the chicken, and we started eating chicken for its meat. And what's happening with, a lot of it is happening with like larger scale companies, but in the nature of uniformity, that in the want or the desire for uniformity and to have things be the same, we are losing biodiversity, and we are losing the diversity that we would naturally see in nature, as if like, you know, if we had several chicken farmers and you only bought local chicken, then the chicken would vary from farmer to farmer, and there would be different breeds of chickens, and the farmers would feed them different things, and that would affect the outcome of the chicken, for example. But instead, we're not getting that diversity because there are large companies coming in, and they are refining the process for us. There have been, like, for example, there was, you know, red rice was the most eaten rice at one point, and then it switched over to white rice for various reasons. And so now we don't really even see red rice anymore. We only see white rice, and we only see a certain kind of white rice for a very particular, for a bunch of different reasons. And that was really interesting. And so I think for me, it was the blend of nature writing and history and food and the history of food. I'm one of those people, I love the Great British Bake Off, but like old seasons when they would talk about like the history of a certain cake, like that is what I love. And the way it's changed, like the history of the cake has changed. He basically does that. If you all are following me even at this point, he basically does that over and over again, but with different food items. And I thought it was an interesting look at humanity. It was an interesting look and a call for action to save our planet in this way, to not let the diversity in our foods ever fumble or fall. to continue to foster diversity in our foods. And in that way, I thought it was brilliant. It was so brilliant. And I really enjoyed it. Again, each section and each chapter could have been its own essay. And in a lot of ways, that's what it feels like. So you're kind of always starting over again and again. And then he has an overarching structure or message rather, like his overall message is like that we need to save and foster our biodiversity through a bunch of different actions, and he gives you a lot of compelling reasons as to why, and I just thought it was great. It was great. It was hope-filled. It was interesting. And it was just wonderful. It was just wonderful. So this was my number one book. I didn't think it was going to be my number one book. I thought other books were going to be my number one book. And yet this one was the one that continued. Even this was one of the last ones that I read. And even when I was sort of like, I don't want to read this. The assigned reading is starting to feel a little much for my reading soul. Whenever I picked it up, I was like, oh yeah, this is great. This is great. And so, it was just, a Shelley book through and through, partly for its writing and its topic, but the way that it was presented. And I just felt like it was we were in the hands of a well-seasoned writer, somebody who knew what he was doing and was doing it well. And that's always wonderful. It's always a wonderful feeling. So yeah, that's it. Hopefully I will come back with the actual results. Then I'll kind of edit that clip in. Y'all don't need to know this. Then I'll edit that clip in and see how my rankings compare to the Booktube prizes. And so I'll see you in a bit. Bye. Hey y'all, so I wanted to come back and update you all on my rankings because there is a little plot twist in my reaction to the round to what actually made it through. So I realized when I was sitting down to put in my rankings that one book has stuck with me a little bit more profoundly, and it impacted me a little bit more than I initially had thought when I sat down with you last. So it's been a couple of days, and I realized that My Fourth Time We Drowned by Sally Hayden really has impacted me. There was something, I think it was something that maybe came up in the news recently. I can't remember exactly the incident, but the thing that popped in my head as I flicked myself was Sally Hayden's My Fourth Time We Drowned. And there was something about her writing that illuminated what was going on globally and what was going on with humanity in a broader sense than I didn't know before. And she really pulls the curtain back to what it is like being a refugee, to being someone who cannot be in their home country anymore and is on the move, and what that is like for individuals. And she just was able to pull the camera back so far that I still think about it, and I think that is a mark of an excellent book. So when I actually sat down to do my rankings, I swapped my number one and my number two. So the books that actually made it through were, they were Eating to Extinction by Dan Saladino, My Fourth Time We Drowned by Sally Hayden, and the Love Canal book, Paradise Falls by Keith O'Brien. And since then I have seen other people's videos and reactions. Mostly I'll leave Elisabeth, her channel is Bookins and Books. I will leave her channel linked down below because she had the same group that I did, and she ranked her books very differently. And she mentioned the writing style in Paradise Falls being that it read like a thriller and that it was just so well done. And I have to agree. And she also mentioned, which I absolutely agree with, was that this group was difficult to rank. It was just hard. It was hard to rank. So I thought that was interesting because, Paradise Falls was my number 5 book and it made it through. But I'm not mad about it. I'm not. I could see why it made it through. I could see why a lot of people really enjoyed it and really thought it was something special. I enjoyed, like I said, I can't shake the fact that there was like this middle section that was so good, but the beginning I was like, I've heard this story before. And then at the end, I just started to lose interest in what was going on. And then and I'm going to quote her, mostly I watched Elisabeth from Bookins and Books. That's, if you can't tell. But Siddhartha Mukherjee, she worded it better than I could, but that it was just a little bit of like too much information for one's brain. Now, thankfully, I had to read it in 2 months, but I did read it over the course of a couple of weeks, and I think that was better than having to like rush read it. So I could take breaks from it and then get back into it. But my thoughts still stand in that the Mukherjee book, Song of the Sow, there were parts that really, the more narrative-driven parts, the less sciencey books, the less sciencey parts of the book, the narrative was really what drove home my ranking of it. It was so elegant, and there was a lot of information which I felt like was a feat. But now that I have like another opinion and that the judges have spoken, I'm like, yes, I can see. And then I think I've said all that I needed to say about how I felt about the other books. But I'm excited for the final round. Good luck to those who are judging. I did not sign up, partly because my life is about to get very busy. I am starting the school year. I'm a teacher, and we're starting the school year really just very, very, very quickly here. But yeah, that's how I ranked these books. Please let me know what you thought and your opinions down below. I would really appreciate that, in the comments. And of course, for all of you who like and comment and who are subscribed, I just deeply and greatly appreciate you all. It means a lot to me. And yeah, that's it. I'm gonna stop rambling on. But thank you so much for spending this time with me. Thank you so much for just being willing to watch this video. And I will see you all in my next one. Bye.